Well, welcome everyone. My name is Arthur Samuelson. I'm the program director at the Rowe Conference Center. We're delighted and thrilled to be your host tonight, presenting you with George Leoniak. We've been in Western Massachusetts for almost 100 years. We run weekend workshops on spirituality, personal growth, all the creative arts, nature, and social change, all things we believe go into making flourishing lives. We run summer camps for kids and adults as well. And of course, in this last year and a half, and I don't know, maybe the next year and a half, we've had to do most everything online, which has been an extraordinary experience for us to be able to reach way beyond our ordinary geographical and other demographic boundaries. And it's been a learning experience for all of us, I'm sure, but a great opportunity as well. I want to introduce my colleague, Fia Alexander, who is going to be helping out. Fia, welcome.
Thank you. I just wanted to tell everybody that if you have questions tonight, please enter them into the chat and I will be hoping to get them answered. And if you have any other problems with Zoom, and you can private chat me on the list. So, and welcome.
And you will all be you're all muted for the time that George is talking, and then you'll be allowed to unmute if you'd like. So it's my honor and privilege to welcome back to Rowe, virtual as it is, but nonetheless Rowe, George Leoniak, who has taught at Rowe many times, tracking programs. As his mindful tracking program with Paul Resendez. George is an accomplished tracker who's been doing this now for almost 3 decades. And it was in the course of observing nature really closely as a tracker that he began to become inspired by the possibilities of understanding the geometry that underlies all of it. And that has taken him into a completely new direction. Some of you may know George through his tracking, and we're delighted to have you join us in this journey to catch up to where George has gotten to in his studies. So welcome, George. And before we start, I just want to point out that also at the in January, George is going to be teaching. This is really an introduction to a 5-part program that George is going to be teaching in January that towards the end, he'll have a chance to tell you some more about. So welcome, George.
Okay, greetings. Am I still on mute?
Nope.
No, everybody can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, I'm super excited to be here, George Leoniak, and thank you all for coming out to this presentation this evening. And I've got a presentation set up already on a slideshow, and it's filled with images and a lot of the things that I've been doing with sacred geometry. I'm going to go over a little bit of my backstory of really how a wildlife tracker kind of gets into sacred geometry. It actually isn't all that big of a leap anyway, because you know, the tracks and observing patterns in nature, or looking at a leaf, or water in a creek, all of that is sacred geometry to me. So it wasn't a big leap, but when you start getting into the constructions of the drawings and learning about what that does and how it brings you out into the expanse of the universe or down to a little itty bitty cell, that's kind of the journey that I really went on these past few years of really studying sacred geometry. So I'm going to hop in and share the screen. You'll see me up in the right-hand corner when I do so. So let me do that. And I want to thank Arthur and Fia tonight for, Fia doing the technological support, and Arthur setting up this presentation for me and helping me get this going with a kind of totally new topic that we haven't done at Rowe before, because primarily I've been doing the wildlife tracking for, as Arthur says, over 20 years. So this is a new direction, and I'm pretty excited about it. The presentation tonight is specifically on the flower of life and blossoming in this new era. So I'm going to go over, a little bit about some of the history of the flower of life, how it's constructed. It's a symbol that, many of us have probably seen before, and you'll see the slides coming up. This is not the flower of life. What you're seeing here, this is part of some of the discoveries that I've been making through really doing a deep dive into sacred geometry over these past few years. So I want you just to take a look at this image though first, because we're going to revisit it later on. And as you notice here, there's two main features that are showing up in this kind of network of circular pattern. We've got the pentagon, which is the 5, and we have the hexagon, which is the 6. And this image that we're seeing here really combines these two energies together. And some of my sacred geometry teachers like Jane 108 or other people I've studied, they often kind of think of 5, the phi, this is loaded with the phi ratio, has a lot to do with life. If you cut an apple in half, like in a transverse cut, you'll see this 5-pointed star in the middle of the apple. And then the 6 here is the technology, very technological oriented, everything straight lines. And really this blossoming of the flower of life in this new era is kind of the combination of this nature and technology kind of commingling, and are they in balance or not in balance? So I want to just sit with this image for a little bit. We're going to revisit a little bit later on. Okay, so now here are two books that were actually very influential to me when I was about 20 years old, right at the start of my tracking career about 25 years ago. These two books are written by the same author, Robert Lawler, and one of the books was Awakening in the Aboriginal Dreamtime, Voices of the First Day. And I read this book, it's like 300 pages. I read it cover to cover. And there's quotes in there about tracking as like the primary learning process. They go into great detail of studying all the physical details of the imprint. And it was like a real educational process. And I went on a really deep dive into tracking over 25 years, just wearing through all the knees on a lot of my pants, observing those prints, to the utmost detail. So, that was one book that Robert wrote, but he also wrote this other book. I just happened to be in a bookstore and I saw Robert Lawler's name and I knew that he wrote this other book and I picked that up then. So then I opened up this one and I was like, whoa, mathematics, square root of 3, square root of 5, beautiful drawings and imagery, but it was just, well beyond my ability to comprehend all the details of the mathematics that were associated with the geometry. But, I just revisited this book and he had another quote in there, was the implicit goal of this education was to enable the mind to become a channel through which the earth could receive these abstract geometries, the cosmic life of the heavens, and bring them into manifestation. So there was this kind of interplay. It actually took me 20 something years before I came back to the sacred geometry book that was on my shelf all those years, but never met Robert Lawler, but big thanks to him. So I really got started with the geometry. I did it in school as a young person, but that I didn't retain any of. I mean, I feel like my real education began with learning to read the tracks. And here are just a few images of, how I would go about looking at tracks. If you could kind of see like a radar of like a 3D goggles or something, like what I'm seeing when I look at tracks. I see lines, you see the shapes, you draw X's through them. Trackers have this whole visual language, which is very geometric in describing the shapes of triangular shaped toes or trapezoid shaped toes. If you draw a line here, the toes above it or below it. So really, over years of teaching this, I was refining a language that was based on describing shapes, and then teaching others to see those shapes and then make it form out of it, really, that was an animal. So tracking did a lot more than that, though. It really helped to bring things into the mind's eye and see an animal in your mind's eye as it's making the tracks. Like, how's that animal moving through the tracks? And visualizing that in your mind's eye. It opens you up to like curiosity and observation and like following out a track. Even when you lose the track, don't give up on the trail. More information might come later, and you just have open questions. And really, I just applied all that training, all that interest that I had into it to sacred geometry. So when I followed the tracks on the paper or the trail through the books of studying different forms of historical figures, it's like I'm really engaging with this trail. Here's one of the first little drawings I did. Was I took these spirals, the Fibonacci spirals, and because I've looked at a zillion deer tracks, I was like, hey, if you put two of those spirals together, you could have them wrap around in a way that would come around and, kind of create the outside cloven hoof of a deer track. And, I posted that on Facebook to my tracking friends, just to see that there's this interplay between the two. But remember, if you have a pine cone and you look at that, all those spirals or sunflower, it's all in there, and even in the proportion of our own body. Okay, so now we're going to kind of take a little bit of a turn and really start to get into the sacred geometry. If some of you might have read the article I wrote for Roe, and this was really kind of a pivotal moment for me to pick up the compass and the straight edge, which I had never done before. I mean, I was always paying attention to the patterns. I loved looking at them. They're on logos, they were on yoga mats, they were all over, on people's earrings or t-shirts, it's just geometric designs. And, as a tracker, always observing patterns like that, they were like eye candy. I were like, wow, there must be something there. And then one day I was at the beach with my son, just 3 or 4 years ago, and I was playing at the playground, and all of a sudden the light came through the grate that was up behind my head, and it created this pattern on the column, which is over here on the left, that resonated with me. I'm like, wow, I've seen that before somewhere. And I know it's a little blurry, the capture, it wasn't captured perfectly, but there's 6 little petals here with the central dot and then 6 around that. And you could link these together in creating a circle. And this whole tapestry of light and shadow was just this flower of life pattern. I didn't identify it as the flower of life. I didn't know it was the flower of life pattern at the time, but you could see that this is some geometric pattern. And right then in that moment, I knew that I had to start exploring this subject a little bit more. Later that day, we went to the beach, and, on the beach, someone made this huge heart out of shells. And then inside it, 2 people laid down and did these sand angels, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool signal. I'm going to keep, going, figuring this out and explore it a little more. So here was one of the first little patterns that I did with the flower of life. Is I just kind of took a little segment out of it and, just created a nice little heart shape. And of course, heart-shaped leaves are all over nature. But this over here is actually the first drawing that I ever did. It was actually 3 hours after I saw this pattern. My son and I went to a little diner on the coast, and I just took the cup and, it was like one of those paper drawing tablecloths, and there's crayons there. I took the cup, I turned it upside down, and I just started drawing circles and just drew this pattern. First time I ever done this seed of life pattern. Actually, it's part of the flower of life pattern, and, colored it in. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I just did that with a cup and colored it in. So, I mean, it looks like my son might have done it, but that's the beauty of the sacred geometry is, yes, my son can do this, and any little youngster can do it, or anybody of any age can do it, and kind of have that relationship and the meditative qualities that come through these patterns, which we'll discover are universal at many scales of life. So, like I said, I didn't know much about the flower of life at the time, but flower of life can be found all around the globe. I mean, people have chiseled it in Scotland into rock. Over here in Israel, China tried to make a 3-dimensional version of that on a sphere. You can see it's in Egypt, India, Germany, Bulgaria. I won't read through all of them, 14 other places, Greece. So what is it about this pattern that would be an iconic image that, you know, showed up cross culturally. And then you have people like Leonardo da Vinci and other Thomas Bacon, you know, studying it throughout the ages. So, you know, drawing the flower of life pattern is 19 circles. It's this one right here, and it's very easy to do. Like I said, you're able to do this with a cup. But if you have a compass, you know, that has a little point and a pencil, and you could spin it around, you know, you do one circle, and then you do 2 circles in the Vesica Pisces, 7 circles like that. You just keep going around, would be the seed of life. 13 circles would be this, what is called the egg of life. And then you get to the 19 circles, which would be considered the flower of life. And that's essentially the pattern. You don't have to change the diameter of your compass at all. You could take a branch at like a certain angle and just go to like a sandbox, you know, and just inscribe this around easily. You don't even need a compass. All you need is just the same diameter circle. So, you know, there is another pattern that's beyond that called the fruit of life. And that's these 13 circles that are arranged like this. And when you get to this pattern, we're going to talk about it a little bit more. You start to connecting all these lines, and it creates geometric forms that can actually be held in your hand, like a cube or an octahedron. I'm going to explain what all these other forms, like a dodecahedron, and these forms are in just a moment. But it's a very simple drawing exercise to draw the flower of life. So I've had a lot of fun with the flower of life, because you don't even need to just draw it with a compass at all. You can just get creative with your food. Like over here, I did a little flower of life construction out of almonds and raisins. This actually looks a lot like what I saw on the column, you know, with the irregular shaped petals of the flower, the irregular circles with the black dots being similar to that pattern. But you could do this symmetry of 6 with rocks and placing the rocks on top of one another. You could do it with colorful leaf patterns like in the fall, or, you know, clementines. You could fold up the clementines and put 6 together around one like that. You could do it with flowers or leaves and flowers, you know, a variety of ways to construct this creatively. There's just something about that 6 around 1 pattern that is just so perfect. Like, you know, you could do this at home after this presentation. Take 7 pennies and put all the pennies together and just place the 6 around the 1. You'll see that the edges of all those circles, they just nest together perfectly. And, you know, that's why this 6 around 1 pattern is just so prevalent as this kind of universal pattern. One of the reasons. But of course, you know, yeah, it's a lot more than just like drawing pictures, and it does connect to life at a very deep way. You know, this is a kind of regular cell division, and this was us. You know, this was us at some point. You could think of yourself at one point, you know, you were this egg that was fertilized, that divided into a positive and negative charged cell at the first division. And then slowly those cells continue to replicate until it's 2 to 4 to 8 to, you know, 16 to 32. And it's following that sequence of replication. And here's an image that we just received recently of this is what day 3 looks like of, you know, the development of a human being. And it's just beautiful to see. But this is the geometry of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And there's even a circle probably on the other side creating 8 beyond that. Here's another pattern, you know, found in nature. This is a paper wasp nest, the inside of a paper wasp nest that also has the 6 around 1 pattern. I'll move the thing out of the way there. 6 around 1 as well. And, you know, the larvae of the insect are all laid in these little chambers. So it's another birthing place for the paper wasps and honeycombs of the bees. So we see this pattern continue to show up in natural settings. Now, anybody who talks about the flower of life, really must include Drunvalo Melchizedek's work. He wrote a book called The um, Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, and this book is real classic in sacred geometry. I believe it was written in the 80s. It's a 2-volume set, and he has a wealth of information in there. And he really introduced the flower of life in a major way to a lot of people, and had a way of constructing the 5 platonic solids, which are in this, what he calls Metatron's cube, the tetrahedron, the hexahedron, octahedron, dodecahedron, and icosahedron. And he really brings this into a connection to spirituality, and through the Merkaba, which is this geometric shape, this star tetrahedron shape that you can envision around your body. And it's an ancient Egyptian word. It means light, spirit, body. And it's often called the body of light. That is a geometric structure based on this star tetrahedron shape. And Drunvalo really goes into great detail of how that geometry plays out, and has a whole meditation technique associated with it. The word Merkaba comes from the word Hebrew word for chariot. So I had fun with that a little bit this week and created a Chariots Are Us, because there's a lot of different types of chariots. There's a lot of different geometries around the body. The star tetrahedron is these 2 interpenetrating triangles, which are often thought of a masculine or feminine energy of the 2 triangles coming together in a balanced way. And essentially that star tetrahedron shape is a cube. So if you were to connect all the dots, it would turn into a cube shape. But you also have a shape which is octahedron, which is this 8-sided shape, which can also be around the body, or the 2 of those together make this rhombic dodecahedron. And now I'm probably talking in like different language, possibly for a lot of you. The dodecahedron is a 12-sided shape, and the icosahedron is a 20-sided shape. If anybody has a good set of dice at home, all these are common dice that people use if they're into gaming. 20-sided dice, 12-sided dice, all these are the dice we use, the 5 platonic solids. These 2 can be combined into this rhombic trichontahedron, which is kind of the fusion between the 2. And then this past summer, I created my own mega fusion form called the geohedron. So, feel free to take any of these out for a spin at, Chariots Are Us. Try them out, take them for a drive, see which one you like, to feel into those shapes for fun. Okay, so, another bit of my exploration, I got really into constructing the 3D models of these forms, because I wanted to work with taking the images from the 2D and bring them to 3D. And these 5 platonic solids, which are named after Plato, but were found much earlier than Plato, and he added a few on as well, are the tetrahedron, and they were all labeled after elements. So I built all these and put them into spheres, and had to figure out the math to make sure that when I put the sphere around it, it wouldn't just collapse the object that was inside. And then, I set them up with the elements that they're associated with here in these photographs. So the tetrahedron was representative of fire. The cube was representative of the, and think about this, the tetrahedron having the triangular faces, think of a fire structure, or the look of fire as that triangular structure to it. The cube was the earth, and here's a little bit of the earth and the rock. Octahedron was related to air and the trees and the oxygen, and that has 8 faces. And the dodecahedron here has 12 faces, and that is considered to be the ether, which is kind of the substance that weaves in through the universe, that kind of holds everything together. There's a Greek thought around the ether. And then the icosahedron is the 20-face form, and that represents water. Now, three of these forms, two of the forms here are related to the phi ratio. You see the pentagon face here, back to the beginning of our first slide, and that's the five-sided structure, and the same thing with this icosahedron shape. Now, I had a lot of fun with this. I have a nature connection, so I'm just out there exploring, and I knew that burdock is certainly something that can really be tangly, and if you're in a garden ever and ever run into burdock, you get these burdock burrs all over you. So I was like, hey, these, and the story goes that the person who invented the Velcro, had his visualization given to him through burdock, because he was like, hey, if I can make something that has these little hooks and we put them together, just every jacket you put on is inspired by burdock, think of. Well, I got creative and I was like, I want to make the platonic solids out of little balls, right? So I'm going to make them out of burdock and construct them and together. It was before I figured out I could just buy foam balls and glue them together. But this is a more fun way. Well, I don't know if it was fun. I mean, it was, my fingers didn't think it was that fun, because those little barbs kind of get right in there. But it was pretty neat to kind of count out the patterns and make the pyramid structure of the octahedron. I know they're kind of probably all look like just a giant mass of fuzziness here, but at least you might be able to see the tetrahedron. I tried to decorate the icosahedron shape with the triangular faces and gave you the outline of the dodecahedron. Amazingly, when I did the dodecahedron out it took a lot of balls. I forgot how many numbers, maybe over 360 or something like that, to put it all together. But at the time, I was really interested into, spherical packing. And, when I do this sort of thing, I don't really know that it relates to these mathematical concepts that like Johannes Kepler was studying, like how do you spherically pack all these balls together? And it's like something that big time mathematicians have been studying for ages. But essentially it comes down to like, how do you ship fruit in the most effective way? Or how do you stack it at a grocery store? But how do these things fit together? And, people look at this for atomic structure as well. So I'm going to take you back in my history of, this is really the first sequence of drawings that I did before I was doing anything digitally. And it's based on that flower of life structure, because that was the main structure that was really available to me in the beginning. I didn't really know how to draw things from other perspectives or other view. I pretty much had one perspective to work with. And I knew that those forms based on Drunvalo's work were contained in that. So I started off with this sequence of expansion from a small little center point. And this little center point is the cube octahedron, which is basically a cube and an octahedron that have been truncated to make this root form. Now, people like Buckminster Fuller, who is probably most well known for geodesic domes, but anytime you see a geodesic dome, goes back to the work of Buckminster Fuller. But Bucky was fascinated with the cube octahedron. He called it the vector equilibrium. And he said it was like the closest we could come to recognizing 0 point at the center of nothingness, really, or coming as close to God in his own words as we could come through these geometric mathematical concepts, at least. So I got into this exploration of the cube octahedron and then drew in. Now, these drawings are all part of the lines that are making these forms. So I didn't just draw this in the middle of this. It's like a bunch of pickup sticks. But to me, it was like looking for a deer track in pine needles, let's just say. Throw about pine needles are organized like this, I'll find a deer track. This was actually a little easier because the lines were all organized, with a pattern, underlying pattern that I could make sense of here. So the octahedron grew off the cube octahedron. And when you put little triangle or tetrahedrons on top of each of these faces, it all of a sudden becomes a star tetrahedron. And then when you then go to the next phase, it becomes a cube octahedron again. You put the octahedron caps on that, it becomes this shape. And then you repeat the process to the star tetrahedron. And then, wrong way. Then you do the cube octahedron to the octahedron to a big star tetrahedron. to the cube octahedron, to the octahedron again. And I was mind blown because I was seeing this kind of expansion in the geometry, and that these lines were just holographic, let's just say, and that was the key word with this, is like the smallest part contained the whole, and the biggest part was a replication of the smallest part. And it was like wholeness and the implicate order, to phrase, quote David Bohm, that you had the smallest and the largest all contained within these geometric patterns that were just self-replicating. And this is, when you get to the largest bit, is this cube octahedron shape. And this is just like the wire framework of it. And the lengths of these outside edges are the same length as the inside. And it's basically like taking tetrahedrons and putting it together. And this is why Buckminster Fuller was so fascinated with this form, was because all the lengths were the same, and it was in perfect equilibrium, that it was almost static. It didn't have any movement because it was just right in the middle of all the forms. So I was pretty excited about this a few years ago, so excited that I flew out to California, because the Conscious Life Expo was out there, because I knew that Nassim Haramein, who's a physicist who is really into this material, and he studies it with sacred geometry, and he's doing some of the most amazing, groundbreaking work with physics in our modern day and age, and connecting it all to this sacred geometries. He integrated flower of life, the vector equilibrium, which is, this shape over here, and the isotropic vector matrix. And I know it sounds all technical, but it's because 64 tetrahedron grid. But this all, he's like figuring out how that, like, in the smallest little nanoparticle of space contains the whole energy of the whole universe, is in that little spot. It's like the whole energy of the whole universe in that little spot. And he's doing that through this type of, through these patterns. And here is the patterns that I was drawing just previously. Now, when I was doing these, I didn't even know that these were really like things to draw or things to do. I'm just like following the patterns that are there. So I came across his work and was like, I'm going to fly out there. And I brought these images with me, this whole stack of them. And I was like, oh, I'd love to share it with them. That never actually happened because he was being, swarmed by people in the hallway. Luckily, I got into a photograph with them at all, just to chat with them for a moment. But to hand them a stack of these hand-drawn things felt a little out of place when, he's working with like high-tech computer systems that are like doing all these mathematical equations, and then I hand them this. There might be something in this for him, but I think he was a little more advanced at the time, but maybe not, because it's really all from the same geometric patterns. So, I had a lot of fun with the vector equilibrium and the cube octahedron, and I was putting this spherically together. I had to put it in a bowl, but this has got 12 around one in this. This is the first little paper model to kind of turn that into a sphere. So this is just the trail that I'm following. But I started to be like, where's the dodecahedron? Like, where are the phi-based forms? Where are the icosahedron? Where's water and ether in this? I was, up to this point, pretty much just drawing the same pattern, which was tetrahedron, cube octahedron, cube, octahedron, everything that was based on this flower of life pattern. But I didn't know how to draw the dodecahedron and the icosahedron other than what was shown to me previously with Drunvalo's work. Now, remember I mentioned him, he's the one who wrote that ancient secret of the flower of life. This was his drawing in the book based on Fruit of Life was, this is what it looked like. And then here was the dodecahedron, and he was, this is a tough drawing. You got to draw Metatron's cube, it's called. And just when I throw around Metatron's cube, just so you know, that's an archangel. So, it's a pretty big thing to have an archangel's cube. But Metatron's cube, let me just explain that for a moment, because I don't want to go up against challenge Metatron's cube and say it's not true. That's a pretty big thing to say. Metatron's cube was created by Leonardo de Pisana, who is actually Fibonacci. So if you ever heard of Fibonacci sequence and the spiral, Fibonacci spiral, well, Fibonacci also gave us this pattern of Metatron's cube, and he labeled it Metatron's cube during that time. So we have a historical record of where that came from. So, but this is how it was drawn in Drunvalo's book. And all of a sudden I got into the mathematics and I was like, wait a second. This is not the true version, because if I take this off of the Wikipedia site, you know, Wikipedia gives you the accurate drawings of this. You see this little flared up edge here. See how this is kind of not a perfect triangle straight across here. I was like, wait a second, that's not actually the right measurement. This should be 1 inch in here if it's going to be true to phi, and this is actually 0.8. And then I went over to the dodecahedron and did the measurements on that. Now remember, a pentagon face is all phi relationship. And remember, phi is really connected to life and the patterns of life. Phi ratio is found in spirals, and it's found in our proportion of our limbs. Starfish, think of a starfish, for instance, you know, five fingers. So we've got, you know, 1 inch. It should be 0.618 on the back edge, but when I did this drawing, it turned out to be 0.48 in 1 inch, and that's not the phi ratio. So I started to wonder, what would the drawings? Was it like a perspective thing, or? And there was another thing that was unusual, is like they weren't fitting into the pattern where you would just like blow them out and they would link together and nest together. They were kind of like their own separate drawings. So it didn't really kind of connect to a pattern that was showing me wholeness. They were just like, we could draw them in here, but then I found out it wasn't true. They weren't actually found in the Metatron's cube, flower of life, fruit of life drawings. So at that point, whenever that happens, so I'm just going to go back to my tracking training. It's like, you have to look at it from a new perspective, you know, change your vision, look at things from a different angle. So I said, okay, I'm done drawing flower of life for now. You know, I don't understand how the phi-based structures fit into that. And icosahedron, dodecahedron are very important forms linked to ether and water. So I was trying to, I started to draw things from a square perspective, and then started making these this big model, you know, it's quite large, and then looking at it and trying to draw exactly what it was that I was seeing in the geometry of these shapes. So right at the center of this is that icosahedron, dodecahedron shape in this giant cube, and these strings that go across here would be like these lines of the drawing that basically create those shapes. And it's an actual three-dimensional structure. And here I am kind of turning it so you can see it from more of the flower of life perspective, which is kind of a view from the vertex down. So there's an author named Malcolm Stewart. He wrote this book, Patterns of Eternity. Excellent book. It was out of print. It is expensive to get, but I knew that I needed to get it because of this star cut diagram. Now, what I'm showing you here in my drawings isn't the star cut diagram. It's actually the star cut diagram extended beyond this. And this was, I was kind of like in a new frontier here, because I was working with the images that I'd never seen before. But that gave me kind of the revelation to kind of transpose what I was learning there back to the flower of life petal pattern of the seed of life, you know, 6 circles that we're seeing here. So this here is that square version. So this is my kind of education with this other perspective. And I started working with these phi-based circles, and I'll explain more of that later, but well, I'll explain it now, I guess. There's a circle here, this dark blue one, and then there's this red one in the middle. Now there's 2 circles, and both of those are in phi relationship, meaning they're holding that relationship of 1 to 0.618, which is the phi ratio. And I needed to put that circle in to find the correct place to hold the phi ratio in this drawing, and same thing for the icosahedron. Now, these points right here look like they're kind of floating out in the middle of nowhere, but they'd actually be part of this petal pattern that you see here within the icosahedron. You have to draw both together, was basically what I'm saying. So this was really a big revelation to me, and I have a lot of YouTube videos on this material that describes that this is actually what these forms look like and not this or this. And after you've seen this and are aware of this, when you go back and look at sacred geometry images, you'll see this pattern everywhere. You know, this icosahedron version with just the two equilateral triangles, you see that. And you'll see this shortened edge compared to that edge everywhere. I mean, it's everywhere through the culture of images that you see related to sacred geometry. Very few drawings actually have this. So I'm kind of like waving my hand over here saying, hey, you know, this is kind of what they look like. Now, all the mathematicians know they look like this, and they probably look at these sacred geometry drawings and are probably like, yeah, there's not much there for us because they're not even drawing the icosahedron right. So actually, it wasn't till this summer that I drew the 5 nested platonic solids for the first time ever, nested together in one drawing. And this is what it looked like. This is all the platonic solids in relationship to actual points on the form. And it looks like a bunch of lines everywhere. I mean, I have to pull it all apart. But one thing is that there's a cube in here. I'm going to outline it. It's got a hexagon shape, and it's got a line that goes here, and a line that goes here, and a line that goes here. Now that's the cube in there. And then the dodecahedron is the pentagon shape. The icosahedron is this triangular shape. And you've got your tetrahedron in here, which is part of the cube. And down in here is the octahedron shape, that little triangle there. And they're all nested together, and it all came through that drawing. Up until that point, I had never seen a drawing that showed me how to nest the platonic solids together. Everything was the other version of doing that. So it was really kind of eye-opening to me, and it kind of did something to the cube that was unusual. It tilted it at an angle, and it put the icosahedron straight to you and the dodecahedron straight. So I experimented with that a little bit and actually was able to draw this big massive structure that I did with the 5 circle drawings that I've been doing, and draw the icosahedron nested down in the middle of it. Now, this might not seem mind-blowing to all of you, but to me, this is like, I'm sneaking up on an animal type feeling, because you've been tracking this question, these sacred questions, for months and months and months and years. And all of a sudden you start to get little insights into how it's all connected and what were the missing pieces and what trail did you follow where you had to backtrack on to come back to the trail. But it really all came down to this phi ratio circles that I elaborated on and did it throughout the whole pattern. So it was really this 5-base circle from the red to the blue, which I have a funny, little thing here that I call the LO to the VE. If you divide LO by VE, it equals 1.618, and that's the phi ratio. And I expanded that into the whole flower of life structure. And this is, to me, kind of part of the blossoming of the flower of life in this new era, is it kind of actually has the life component to it now, because it has the phi ratio circles. There's actually 3 nested layers of phi circles that all link together. And when I look at this image, it's reminiscent of watching raindrops and the concentric circles that they leave on the surface of like a still pond or a pool of water. Just picture some of them coming in, some out, coming out. This is where I'd love to have the animation skills to pull that off. But I then started to, discover where the forms were in this larger pattern. And up until this point, that dodecahedron form that Doug Drunvalo described, it was kind of like the holy grail of his discoveries, was like, how do you draw the dodecahedron? No one was sure how to draw this shape in sacred geometry. with these Flower of Life circles. He discovered how to do his version like 3 hours before a workshop once, and then started to teach on it. Well, this one nests 3 dodecahedrons within one another, all the way out to here, and they're all perfectly beautiful dodecahedrons, all within those phi ratio circles. And you'll notice in these drawings, when you start to work with these phi-based circles, is that it orients the dodecahedron shape towards you, and the cubes are going to be tilted. They're the ones that are these stars. So this little thing to review is there's 5 cubes in this dodecahedron. So there's really not just one cube in there. There's 5 in that shape. And now each of them are getting creating one of these star shapes. So there was a lot of I was doing some comparison between what you can do with this phi version of the Flower of Life in comparison to like what you're drawing in the regular version of the Flower of Life. Is you have real access to the octahedron, the cube, and the tetrahedron within that pattern, and they work really nice together in that expansive drawings that I showed you early on with the successive sequence of drawings that Nassim Harameyn's vector equilibrium shape was in. And then with this pattern, you can do that too, but now you're getting this icosahedron, dodecahedron, and even new forms that have recently been discovered. This is by a friend of mine now. His name's Frank Chester. I started doing videos on a 7-sided form that he created back in about year 2000. A 7-sided form that incorporates the phi ratio and equilateral triangles. And he did beautiful work with how this nests inside the Earth. His work actually describes how this shape relates to the human heart as a vortex. So I'd recommend checking out Frank Chester's work on the chestahedron, he calls it, not just because of his name, but because it's related to the human heart. And he wrote a book called The New Sacred Geometry. And he's really been, I did a lot of these drawings these past few months when he's been kind of encouraging me to keep going with my discoveries of these phi-based circles, because back in 2000, he was using them with the chestahedron. So I just wanted to illustrate, this is the drawing that you might typically see. And when you develop a kind of tracker geometer's eye around this, when you look at these woodcuts or these beautiful images, just take a quick look at your dodecahedron, icosahedron, and you'll notice right away the equilateral triangle and compared to how that comes up. Now, that's not to discredit all the beautiful artwork that's out there. It's not my intention of doing that. It is just kind of like saying, well, okay, this is an icosahedron, this is not an icosahedron. So it's just good to know the difference in the artwork that you're seeing. So let me go on to the next slide. And this is expanded. I know, we've got fruit, flower, we've got seed of life, egg of life, all these. Where's the tree of life, right? Well, the tree of life is also a structure that's a geometry. And this is the tree of life as drawn in a lot of the Kabbalistic text. You'll see this image of the tree of life. And this was a mystery from mine a couple of years ago, mystery of Nassim Harameyn's, of like, what's the geometric, Nassim's the physicist researcher. And he's like, what's the geometric structure of the tree of life? And I've been curious about that for a while. And once I started working with these phi-based circles, all of a sudden it started, for me at least, to click, to figure out what I feel is a pretty good representation of the tree of life as a 3-dimensional structure that's connected to this seed of life. And I'm throwing around all this jargon, the seed of life pattern that is part of the golden ratio, golden rhombus structure. You got to check out my video on this. If you're really curious about this one, my video on YouTube labeled this with this golden rhombus goes into this really in detail. It's just a really neat exploration, because what you can, if you look at these as 2D drawings, picture this as a flat plane, like a hexagon just going flat. Now picture if I just pinched that hexagon at the top and bottom and just pulled it apart just a little bit to bring it into space, like I breathed some air in it, and it just puffed up a little bit. If you keep doing that, you're going to eventually create a cube. If you sink it back down, it's going to create this golden seed of life, golden rhombus structure, which is actually a geometric structure that's recognized by, mathematicians. So that's just like one of the first places where you pull it apart where the golden ratio shows up. And it just happens to be this point where the tree of life really makes itself recognizable. So that's a whole nother thing to go on. These are all little trails for maybe you to follow. I have videos on some of this, not all this. I haven't done a video on this, so you're going to be seeing some of these images for the first time. So, now that I went through that, it was like, whoa, sacred geometry just exploded for me. It almost got a little out of hand because I'm now starting to create structures and forms that I've only looked at in a book and my eyes glazed over because I'm like, I don't know how to draw that. It's not in the flower of life. Move along, because it was just like some mathematician must have just figured it out and started putting spiky things on these forms, which they did. But also, this goes back to before computer generation of these programs. Johannes Kepler was the first one who discovered and documented this form. So Johannes Kepler, he's the one who described the elliptical orbits of the planets, big time astronomer. In 1619, he published this Harmonix Mundi, Harmony of the Worlds. He was way into polyhedra. He discovered 4 of these star polyhedra. And I didn't even realize it until after I drew this, because I discovered it in this geometric pattern of this seed of life, flower of life. And all these circles have complete resonance, complete meaning to every line on this drawing. My apprentices and my other sacred geometry apprentice, a lot of the things we talk about is like how the circles, and the circle is usually a symbol for the feminine principle, and the male is like the straight line. How this is just the way geometers talk about this. I don't mean to attach major gender issues to this, but just take that circular view, and that the circles themselves dictate where these lines are going to end and start and go, rather than imposing the lines on the image. The circle pattern contains it. You just kind of have to have the curiosity and the eyes to go in and see it in there. So, this image right here is really the most cutting image that I've done. This is from yesterday morning. I woke up, I figured out how to draw this form, and yes, it is called the echidnahedron. I thought that was good to include some wildlife in this, because I am a tracker, and luckily after following all these geometry trails for all these years, I was able to finally come back to the echidnahedron. But yeah, so the echidnahedron here is a form that is the final stellation, meaning it's the final spiky thing that you do with the icosahedron, which remember is water. It's that 20-sided shape. And I woke up and I was like, okay, I'm just going to draw this. I did this drawing just from mind's eye completely. I didn't even have this image here yet. I did this all from mind's eye with following the lines of the circle. And then later that day, just yesterday, which was Friday afternoon, I went to the post office, and my 59 icosahedron book showed up. Turned open the first page. I was like, wait a second. I drew this from another angle. First page is the same drawing that I just did that night, the echidnahedron version. And I could tell in the drawing that the way this was done was not done on computer, because you could see these lines are a little bit out of place. They must have done it from actually looking at the 3D form and then drawing it out as best as possible. But this version right here has taken these highly complex mathematical structures. This guy, HSM Coextra, I don't know if you see his name there. He's the guy who's considered to save geometry. That's his title, Save Geometry, because he brought it into the 4th and 5th dimension. And he started doing all these things with the forms. Well, this kind of brings that material into sacred geometry in a way that you could draw it and start to create, you know, really, to me, incredible imagery like this. You can color these points in a lot of different ways, but they're in groups of 5 clusters, and this is all related to the phi ratio. This structure is completely based on that, and I wouldn't have come to it otherwise without following the phi-based ratio and integrating it into the flower of life. Okay, now we're going to go like really out there and really expansive, because you can't have a sacred geometry talk without dropping in a crop circle, from the UK from 1997. And just this previous week, with my apprentices and on a couple of sacred geometry forums that I was on, I was like, geez, I can't wait to see a crop circle that shows up and shows me the phi ratio circles in it. I mean, I'm sure they were probably out there, but I didn't realize the answer to my universal open-ended question would show up 2 days later when a fellow colleague, Peter Vandenberg of Norway, who's a really way into crop circle studies, he posted just a random thing, not random, but it posted a unassuming post onto this forum, and I saw it and I said, hey, check out the measurements on those circles for me. Are they in phi ratio? And he wrote back, he said, yeah, they're 0.236, 0.381, 0.681. Those are 4 levels of phi ratio. And that's what this whole pattern was based on, is all the phi ratio circles. So I drew up this image and sent it back to him. And I said, you know what? Those points at the tip of those crescents are the points where, if you follow them back, they give you the points for creating a dodecahedron right at the center of that. And this is a crop circle. And I just want to give you an appreciation of like how difficult this is to create at that massive scale and have all those phi proportions super accurate, try doing it on hand drawn and see how accurate you are. I'm doing this on a, iPad drawing program, which is really accurate, and it's as accurate as this pretty much. So, studying the crop circles always are kind of a great mystery to follow. There's some really neat imagery in there. Just a couple more slides here and we'll be wrapping up and get to those questions. But, another neat thing from this phi-based method, I discovered a way to create a 9-pointed star in there with great accuracy, because you can't draw a 9-pointed star 100% accurately. But this method, what I call the icosahedron method, gives you the points on the outer circle of the seed of life. I have a whole video on that one too. And then I created another version of it with the phi circles right in the flower of life. And this one is to like 99.9% accurate as well. And it really brings in this kind of energetics and bringing in Nikola Tesla's work and this integration of the 9 into the flower of life is just something that geometers are always making the link between the mathematical side of things and the geometry. And it's really ripe for novice amateur geometers and explorers of this information to follow many trails of the connections that you'll see. But there's a binary sequence within this digital compression of these numbers that Nikola Tesla made famous. And just to mention, this angle here, they thought was impossible to trisect an angle of basically taking a 30-degree angle and dividing it into 10-degree increments. You think we would have figured that out after 2,500 years, but apparently that was like a conundrum for everyone. And this method in here that I discovered, which may be the most accurate that we have gotten, comes up to 10.008 degree angle for that trisection. Just a little, I don't know, geek note for y'all. Hopefully I don't sound too geeky with all that information, but I've embraced that part of myself fully. Okay, so this is one other pattern that's out there that's called the eternal lotus of life. And this is hot off the press, straight from this morning. I'll wake up this morning. What's going to come this morning? What's the last thing that wants to be in the slide? Well, it happened to be this drawing. And this is the one that connects us back to the beginning, because I took this pattern of 12 circles and I added the 5 circles that I've been talking about, the little ones in the center of the bigger circle. So here's one, there's a little one. And when you do that, all the little cross points that meet this line, every single one of them divides this circle into 60. Now, if you want to start getting into the watchmaking business or anything like that, now you've got a great method how to create the perfect 60 subdivisions of a circle. Now that brings us way, way, way back in time. We're going 4,500 years ago to the ancient Sumerian counting system. Their whole mathematic system was based on base 60 mathematics. And they used to count, on their fingers, just like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, rather than going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They would use their digits to count like this. And there's a big movement now called the Dozenal counting system that wants to move back to a 12 base system of mathematics. They feel it's more intuitive for children and people of all ages to understand fractions and base mathematics. But this goes way, way back to dividing the circle into 60 segments. And of course, that relates to time, which, hey, who wants to be too excited about time a lot of times, but 60 seconds, 60 minutes, right? We've got angles and geographic coordinates. So just another little discovery. But then you could turn that pattern into just like this type of, to me, highly resonant picture where you pull out the little circle from the center and then turn it into this 60 pointed star. First one I've ever created of this level of accuracy. One last thing here. Remember I mentioned the pentagon and the hexagon way, way back to the beginning of the first slide? Well, a lot of the geometry that I'm working with is uniting both of the pentagon and hexagon, the nature, the technology, bringing those two in together to work together in harmony. And by those two symbolic references of the hexagon and pentagon, each sharing the same inner circle and actually subdividing the circle together in just a symbolic way, kind of starts to create different patterns than what we're normally seeing represented, where the hexagon and the pentagon are joined together rather than overlapped and sharing the same space together. So, okay, I don't know, I really didn't keep a track on the time. I hope that wasn't a lot longer or shorter than I expected. But there's a few ways you can get in contact with me. For one, Arthur's going to talk a little bit about the program I'm doing at Rowe, 5 weeks. Now, we're going to slow it way, way back. We're not going to do all that. We're going to really start from the simple Vesica Pisces and integrate a lot of nature connection material in that as well. How to start to see these patterns in nature and draw upon my years of observations. I also got Everything is New Geometry, KNEW new, because that's the process I go, is about through the remembering of the sacred geometry. But you got YouTube, I've got a Patreon site where I've got a lot of information. I'm actually going to put this on Patreon, this whole slideshow on one of the tiers there. If you want this slideshow to check out the images more, it's going to be right on there for you to get. My website, I got a blog and Instagram, do a little bit there. Got a Facebook group as well, New Geometers. Check that out if you're interested in joining. And just so much thanks for coming and checking this out. Really appreciate you all joining me here tonight. Much love and many blessings. And I think I'm really excited about the questions. And I got one more thing before Arthur hops on. I posted one thing on Facebook. I got, I'll stop the share. I got a special surprise just for you. First time ever seen by anybody. How do I get out of this share? Escape. Stop share. Okay. Here is. I had to go. I didn't have to go all the way to Australia to get this one, but I got the echidnahedron right here. First, made this one, finished it up yesterday for you, and that's the echidnahedron. It was a real joy to make, and really, you could see the 5 pointed stars, the little shape of the 5 at the middle, and it's got a few different views. That's the view that I showed you in the drawing. So that would be the flower of life kind of design. But, you know, I figured out how to make it and draw it and figured out all the angles, all from the drawings, just took it right from that and reconstructed it from what you've seen. So thanks again, and hope you'd enjoyed this holiday celebration with the echidnahedron in Vermont. All right, everybody. Arthur, you're on, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
That's great. Well, why don't we take questions first?
Okay, great. Fia, you're going to field those for me, or was there any in the chat?
We really don't have any. We have a few comments,
Okay.
like wishing high school geometry had been taught that way. There's one person said they were placed in a gifted art program because I used to simply draw something similar over and over and over again and had no idea what I was doing, but always felt inspired to keep repeating these patterns I saw in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me think of a water lily.
Yeah.
And how can we use this in everyday life?
Oh, yeah. I saw that one just pop up. That's a big one. That's the big question. Well, I guess the best way I could say that is just like with tracking, right? Tracking is not a skill that people use, they think they use in everyday life. Same thing with sacred geometry. It's not like how you use it, it's like what you become, right? It's like how you integrate this into your way of being, how you relate with things, how you see things different, how you hold things from multiple perspectives, how you can see different viewpoints, be more accepting, more malleable with your perspectives, and do things in creative ways, see multiple options to go through things. I mean, it's really, it's that type of education that tracking gave me, and this kind of exploration that I've done with the geometry and the way I'm showing you has all just been how that integrates into your life. So you become the patterns, right? You know, you resonate with the patterns because remember, you are those patterns. So it's hard to know how you can't not integrate that into life. We can only maybe become more tuned to recognizing how it is more around us in all of life and in a lot of things we see. And that, I think, just gives you a lot more appreciation and a sense of well-being, of kind of connection and wholeness to this beautiful life that surrounds us, maybe make different choices around how we relate to things. So I think it's really on that level of consciousness. And then we can create artwork, we can create gardens, we can create mandalas, we can stack our fruit in a meditative way, all those sort of things, right? So that's where I'm going with that question.
Do you think this is an art for only a few chosen or for everyone?
Oh yeah, I think it's for everyone for sure. You know, I have, like for instance, in my apprenticeship, and hopefully I'll be able to share with the folks that are going to join the program, I have people who have never drawn any of these forms. They thought they couldn't do it, you know, 40 something years old. And then I showed them simple patterns, complex patterns, which some of the forms are seeing, and they are just loving it, you know, and they are gifted. They just didn't know they had this gift until they started to access it. So it turns on that creativity in a way that may be dormant if you feel like you're not one of the gifted. It will turn on your gifts, and it might not be sacred geometry, but guaranteed it might be something else that catches your attention, because it will awaken all that lives inside you.
Do I have to know math to take your course?
No, not at all. No, in fact, all the drawings that I do, I don't even, they don't show me any mathematical equations in the drawing program. So I do that on an iPad. There's no math. I just draw the patterns. And then I've had to learn math afterwards, but it's always the patterns first. And then I apply the math afterwards. And it just balanced out a greater appreciation for me, because I gravitate, as you could see with tracking and measuring thousands of tracks over the years. It's just kind of my nature to be someone who likes leans towards the quantitative side of things. But I'll mention a little bit of the root foundations of math because it does apply, but it's not fundamental or foundational at all.
I don't have any more questions at the moment, but I don't know if you want to talk about what the 5-course program will address.
The 5-part program, yeah.
I mean, 5-part program, sorry.
Yes, the 5-part program. So we're gonna, start off kind of at the basics and kind of just go over maybe one drawing technique on the simpler sides each week. And throughout the course, we're gonna mix all that with some outdoor exercises, train the eyes to see a lot of these patterns in nature. So there's gonna be indoor exercises and outdoor exercises. And one pattern that you could start to work with without the week that will be a simple drawing. But we're going to cover a lot of other things like squaring the circle is a common thing in geometers, and squaring the circle is bringing the square, which represents matter, and the circle into harmony with one another, and the circle representing spirit. So this is an ancient geometer squaring the circles to bring both those two in fusion together and kind of bring spirit and matter together in a symbolic way. So that's one of the drawings. And we can do that in a few simple steps with no math at all. That diagram happens to be the Earth and Moon proportion ratios and a lot of other neat things. So that's 1 week. I'll do a little bit on the seed of life and the 5 base circles and show you how to draw, an icosahedron and things like that. But everything's going to connect to enhancing the relationship to the patterns outside and inside at the same time.
Great. Well, I think we should leave them wanting more.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
certainly want more. George's 5-part program is called Exploring and Drawing Sacred Geometry of the Natural World. You're actually going to be drawing. You're not just going to be listening, and you're not just going to be looking. You're going to actually be drawing. The program, it starts on January 10th. It's 5 Mondays from 7 to 9. And that's January 10th, 17th, 24th, 31st, and February 7th. So we will be, I believe that Fia has already posted the URL. Maybe she can do that again. That'll take you to the page that she's put up on the web right now, where you can get more information and also register. We're going to be posting in a couple of days. We'll be posting a video of tonight in case you want to review it. It'll be on our website as well. And I hope that we'll get to see you all in January as we go deeper. So thank you, George, and thank you everybody for coming.